Check out the super lame little table that's between these two chairs. This is what my wife has been using for years now. It's actually a prototype of an adjustable sofa table that I made years ago, and she's hung on to it because I haven't made her anything better. Well, that's about to change. She wanted something much nicer, so I designed this. This is a drop leaf end table that should fit that space much better. It'll have a drawer for her so that she can safely store all of her fireworks, and both leaves of the table will be hinged so that they can fold up and a small support can be pulled out to extend the table surface. Overall, when both leaves are folded up, the tabletop more than doubles in size, making this a rather elegant yet versatile end table that should be a perfect solution for her. All right, well, let's see if we can build this thing. Well, the first thing to do was to pick up some material. Like most of the furniture I build, I decided to go with black walnut. I really enjoy working with it, and it's just so darn pretty. I brought in all the boards, and then I let them sit in the shop for a couple days to acclimate. The next thing to do was to break down the boards into more manageable sizes, and I did that over at the miter saw. After that, each board needed to get planed down to remove some leftover mill marks and to get them down to their final thickness. Once I got close, I just kept checking them after each pass until the calipers said 3/4 of an inch. Then it was over to the joiner where I could give each piece one good square edge. At this point, I could cut each of the pieces down to their final dimensions, which was a bunch of work on the table saw and the miter saw. And then I was sure to jot down where this video will rank on the YouTube algorithm. And now, for the pieces that make up the table surfaces, I really wanted to capture the color variances of the wood. I really like the look of the transition from sapwood to the heartwood of the black walnut, so I cut the pieces in a way where I could really get a lot of that across the three surfaces. Next, I needed to tilt the blade in the saw a bit so that I could cut some angled pieces that'll be the sliding supports. I figured 70 degrees ought to be good enough because that's what my dad always set the thermostat to when I was a kid. I cut the angled edge on both sides of each of the sliders, and then I also made some rails that'll go on either side of them. Once I had them all created, I could lay them out and sort of test out how they'll function. I made this template out of 1/4-inch plywood. This will show me what areas need to be cut out and help me make the sides of the table so that they're both identical. And to fasten it down, I just used strips of painter's tape and some CA glue and activator. Then over at the bandsaw, I can remove the sections on each side, being sure not to accidentally cut into the template. Now, I know I have the wrong blade on the saw for this, but it's such a pain to change it, so I'm just sort of making do with this giant resaw blade. It works. Once I got one side cut out, I did the same thing for the other side, and then I took the piece over to the drill press so that I could drill in a hole for my jigsaw blade. Then with that, I could cut out the center area. Next, I'll be trying out this new bit I got. This is a 1/4-inch compression flush trim bit from High Country Tools. The spiral cut of the bit all but eliminates grabbing and catching, so there's no chatter or nasty tear out, which you often get with flat-bladed trim bits. Instead, the bearing rides along the template and the bit just clears everything else away in one fluid, smooth pass. This step was actually really simple and fun thanks to this new bit. The coupon code FISHER10 will save you 10% if you wanted to try it out for yourself. You'll find them over at highcountrytool.com. Afterwards, the template gets removed, and I just repeat the entire process for the other side piece of the table. Now I can start to build out the rest of the table sides. And instead of trying to cut the perfect mortises into larger blocks of wood that the side piece would fit into, I decided to just build around them and make the mortises through lamination. Now, some of you might consider that cheating, but I think it's just a shortcut. Like when I was a kid, I'd open the cereal boxes from the bottom just to get the toy out quicker. It's not really cheating, it's just a shortcut. Once I got the 3 layers glued up, I could slide out the side piece, tip it up, and throw on some clamps. And then I used the same technique for the top sections too. Now it's time to carve in those fancy looking curves into the legs. I figured the easiest way to do it would be to make another template. I used my compass on my square to draw out the curves on some plywood, and then I cut and I shaped it using a miter saw and the belt sander. And with that created, I could position it just right on each of the leg assemblies and then just trace the curves. The bandsaw let me remove most of the waste. And then I just sanded it up to the line using the belt sander. Then a little bit later, I had both of the leg assemblies done, as well as both of the top sections. I added a small round over to these pieces, as well as to the sideboards, but I was really careful not to route any areas that would be going into the mortises. I want those corners to be really crisp. And when it came time for glue up, I just added glue to the inside of the mortise, and I tapped on it with the mallet of persuasion. But it wasn't long before I had to switch to the hammer of insistence to get it fully seated. The top pieces went on in the same way. And once I had them both looking good, I could move on to adding the feet. For these, I just added a touch of glue, a few grains of salt to keep them from sliding around, and I dropped on the legs. I made sure they were spaced just right, and then I added some weight while they dried. Next, to connect the two leg assemblies, I used my trim router with a straight bit to cut a dado in each one. And you're probably asking yourself, why didn't he make these cuts before gluing all this crap together? Well, sometimes I swear my IQ is the same as room temperature. But at least it still worked. Now that the leg assembly is done, I can get to work on making the cabinet box that goes on top of it. I put my dado stack in the table saw, and then I cut all of the rabbets into the edges of the pieces. Then I tipped the side pieces on end, and I began to cut out the area for the sliding supports. And I made sure to put a piece of scrap behind them both to protect against any tear out as well. Now I unpacked my biscuit joiner, and I made a couple cuts along the top edge of each side piece. I'll use these cuts to help fasten on the top in a later step. Alright, now I can put this thing together. I just ran some glue down the rabbets on each side, and put them in place, and added some clamps. I add downward clamping pressure to make sure that they're fully seated, and then sideways pressure to draw them in. And once I have it all clamped up, I squeeze in one of the top braces so that it can hold everything square. And when that's dry, I can add on the back piece and get that all clamped up. And for the top braces, I figured, why make things harder than they need to be? And I just used pocket holes to secure these pieces in place. I mean, nobody's going to see this at all. The top will be covering it, and it'll be completely hidden, so nobody will even know, except for the tens of thousands of people that watch this video. I guess I didn't think of that. Well, the next step was to add the first angled rail. I measured out where it goes, and I glued and screwed that into place. And then once it was dry, I could use my flush trim saw to notch out the sides to meet up with it. There we go. I used one of the sliding supports to help me determine where the center rail goes, and then I could get that glued in. And then I just repeated the same process to get the last rail installed and notched out. And I was just about to glue on the stops when I realized I should probably do this after I wrote my finger dinger thing. Krepskis. Alright, well, it's a good thing I remembered now. But then my camera battery died, so you don't get to see me route in my finger dinger thing. So now I can glue on the stops, and then the sliders are done. Next, I had to build the plywood drawer box. And since you've seen me build about 1,000 of these in past videos, I figured I'd take this time to tell you about the sponsor of the video. And that's my neighbor. Now, my neighbor has been an extremely supportive and integral part of Fisher Shop since day one. Where else would I have gotten all the necessary material to make all my projects? And even though my neighbor often forgets to lock his garage door, one thing that he never forgets is to go to FisherShopOnline.com to buy all of his woodworking project plans. There's a ton of them out there to choose from, ranging from shop jigs to home decor. Each set of plans is a set of very detailed step-by-step instructions, and it includes all the information you'll need to make some amazing projects. They're perfect for the beginner, intermediate, and even advanced woodworker. Plus, they're cheap. Like the plans for this drop leaf table, they're just $5. So be like my neighbor. Go to FisherShopOnline.com and pick up a set of plans, and then go and unlock your garage door. All right, back to the project. Now, actually putting the drawer box together is certainly not rocket surgery. Butt joints, a little bit of glue, and then some brad nails, and it just goes together. Just like that. Now for the drawer slides, I used my patented gut vise to hold the drawer box steady while I drew on a center line. Then I just spot the line through the screw holes of the rails, make sure that they're flush with the front, and just screw them into place. And of course I had to include at least one flathead screw in the project. To mount the other half of the drawer slides in the cabinet, I just used a piece of scrap wood to space them up the right amount, and then I set them back exactly 3/4 of an inch so that the drawer front will be flush with the front of the cabinet. Now there's not much room to work inside of this cabinet, so I had to use my little stubby drivers to get this thing screwed into place. But in the end, I got it, and the drawer slid right in. I used some playing cards to center the drawer front within the cabinet opening, and I made the gap even all the way around. Next, I could gently pull it out and get it clamped onto the front of the drawer box. Then I just drilled a couple mounting holes and got it fastened on with some screws. The last thing to make for this part is the drawer pull. For that, I'm just going to make the exact same kind of pull that I've made for a number of my other projects. It's pretty easy to make, and I think it looks really sharp. I'll be sure to include the stencil for this pull within the plans if you want to make the same one too. I just used a little piece of curly maple, which should end up looking real nice against the dark tones of the walnut. And to mount this cabinet on the legs, I decided to use screws. But this meant I had to drill some access holes through the braces on the top so that I could reach them with one of those extended driver bits. I drove the screws in so that just the tips were barely sticking out. Then I placed the cabinet on the leg assembly and made sure that it was perfectly centered. And when it was, I pressed down on all four corners so that the screw tips made small indentations on the legs. This showed me exactly where to drill out for them. Now I can place the cabinet back up there, find the holes with the screw tips, and then drive them the rest of the way in. I'm not sure that this was the best way to do it, but it worked. At this point, I could start to glue up the panels that'll be used for the tabletop as well as for the leaves. And then I could leave those to dry overnight. The next day, I could pop off all the clamps, and then give each one a good sanding to remove any of the glue squeeze out. Now, to cut the half-circle shapes into each one of the leaves of the table, I thought it would be easiest for me to completely overcomplicate it. I started by losing my pencil, and once I got a new one, I mounted this giant piece of scrap onto my trim router. Then I drilled a hole the length of the radius away from the edge of the router bit. Next, I taped the leaves together, and then I countersunk a roofing nail into another piece of scrap which I mounted at the exact center point between the two panels. At this point, I could put the jig onto the nail and then give it a couple test rotations. When everything looked good, I could lower the bit, lock it into place, and then fire up the router. I started the cut by first letting the router go around, carving a shallow groove. Then each additional time around, I lowered the bit just a little bit more until on the final pass, I was about a 1/4 inch deep. At that point, I could stop cutting, vacuum up the dust, and pry off and remove the center point. Then over at the bandsaw, I cut off the majority of the waste, just making sure that the blade stayed right in that routed groove. After that, I could clean off the rest over at the router table with the flush trim bit. I even taped on a bit of scrap at the end of my cut to protect against tear out, but with this new bit, turns out I didn't need it at all. So the idea I have for the routed edges of the table surface is that I want to put this profile around all the outer edges, and then the other profile will be on the inside edges of the leaves. Now you can see that both profiles, if cut correctly, they fit together absolutely perfectly. So when the leaves are folded down, the center table surface will have the seamless edge all the way around. And when the leaves fold up, the profiles will marry together so that the table will have a consistent profile all around the entire outer edge. And here I am cutting those profiles in. Now it might look like I have the bits a little too high since there's a little sliver of material remaining on the bottom, but this was actually necessary to get the good fit that I just showed you with the test pieces. After each cut, I just lowered the bit a small amount and then I ran the pieces through again to get rid of the extra. Afterwards, I had the pieces fitting together like this. Perfect. Next, I can add the hinges. Once I had them in just the right place, I could trace around each one with a razor to mark where the edges are. Then with a chisel, I could accentuate those edges a bit more. I used a router and a straight bit to remove the bulk of the waste, and then I just chiseled out what was left. Cleaning it up a bit more, and perfect. Drilled out the mounting holes, and screwing them in. All right, and now I can put the top on the top. To fasten it on, I'll be using Z-clips. Basically, this end here goes into the slots I cut with the biscuit joiner earlier, and the other end gets screwed up into the bottom face of the tabletop. Once the clips are screwed in, they'll pull the tabletop downward and secure it tightly to the cabinet below. This will hold it on strong, but still also allow for seasonal wood movement. The issue is that there's hardly any room in this tiny cabinet to get a good angle to screw the clips in. You can tell how hard of a time I was having just by looking at me. I normally don't make those faces unless I'm in the bathroom after eating some bad Chinese. Alright, now I can test it out for the very first time. Well, that works pretty darn perfectly. That's awesome. And with both leaves up, there's hardly any sag at all. Maybe about a 1/16 of an inch on each side, but that's definitely something I can live with. Okay, well, let's get some finish on this thing. I'll be using some stung oil from Bumbleshoots for this piece. You've seen me use it a lot in past projects, and that's because it's so nice. I just thin it down with some of their solvent and then use a foam brush to apply it. It goes on super easily and the wood just drinks it in. You just keep applying it until it stops asking for it. The solvent helps it penetrate further down into the wood, and once it has a chance to cure, it offers good protection while also really bringing out the richness of the wood. After about a day or so, I buff off the excess, and then I applied some Carnauba hard wax to add an additional layer of protection as well as a slight sheen. I mean, just check it out for yourself. This thing turned out looking absolutely amazing. I love the curves that are in the legs. Plus, the variety of colors and all the interest really catches the eye. One of my favorite things about working with black walnut is that sapwood to heartwood transition, and I'm really glad that I got to capture that throughout this piece. And I don't know about you, but I love how much the cutout in the sides adds to the character of the table. It gives it like an elegant feel without being too much. The rounded profile of the top looks so good with that round over too. But without a doubt, the showstopper is just how good the tabletop looks with all the color variations of the black walnut. It's just stunning. I love it. Well, my wife absolutely loves the table, so I scored some major husband points with this one. It's just too bad that all those points expire at midnight. But the upside is that she'll let me be fat and lazy and waste away the rest of the day on the couch eating chips, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, if you'd like to build this table for yourself, I have detailed step-by-step plans available for this project, as well as many others, over at my website at FisherShopOnline.com. Hey, if you're new here, I hope you enjoyed the video and that I've earned your subscription. Be sure to give the video a like and leave me a comment down below. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Man. I screwed up. I totally forgot to cut the dado in the sides for the shelf to fit into before gluing up the whole leg assembly. Now I'm going to have to see if I can do it with the trim router. Oh boy. Crap. I just slid the whole thing forward. I knew it. I cut this a little too big. Gotta trim a little bit off. At least it's not crooked, right? Oh crap. Oh, dang it. Ugh. Dang it. Slipped. Oh, it just slipped again. Crap. Oh, crap. Dang it. You jerk. I was sanding and my slider vibrated right off the top and fell down onto the floor and this broke off. Stupid mistake. But I think I can fix it. So what do you do when your arm gets tired and you're having trouble reaching all the way to the back? You improvise.